welcome to Worx Unplugged. I hope you really enjoy the content today, and if you do, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Well, good morning and welcome to our Fair Work Solution podcast today. I'm Wendy Muirhead, Chief Financial and Operations Officer at Fair Work Solution, and I am thrilled that I'm joined with payroll royalty today. I'm joined by the fabulous Simon Parsons, who is in our global payroll community, is certainly someone who is incredibly well known, award winner, multi-time champion of awards across our industry, and has been a dear friend of mine over many decades. And so I'm absolutely thrilled to have you join us today. Simon, welcome.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Wendy. Great, isn't it? It's good to see such a blue sky behind you as well, different to mine. But yes,
Simon,
thanks for inviting me.
You are so welcome. And yes, blue sky in Scotland, how often do we get that? Not very often.
Yeah, wait 5 minutes, is that right?
We'll have snow shortly. We'll have snow. Simon, for those that are listening to the session today, please introduce yourself and your deep wealth of experience.
Yeah, hi. Well, Simon Parsons. I have a couple of titles. So I'm the Director of UK Compliance Strategies for SD Worx. I also run my own little business called Pay Advice. And you can find me on the payadvice.uk web address. So if you just type that in, you find it. And I like to push out lots of materials. Started that at the beginning of COVID because stuff was coming out weekly. It was an element of how do we get this out into the community really quick. So I've been involved in software payroll development since 1984. I know, far too young looking for that to be possible. Yes, and starting out with Centerfile, I've also, which then became Ceridian, which then became SD Worx. Also worked for Cyborg for a period of time, and you know, it's great. I was one of those people that I think I'll say got picked on when I joined as a junior programmer. So they kind of come to me and say, Simon, we've just got this little task for you, just to see how you get on, you know, as an intro. And then they give me these things, these projects, and I go away and do them and come back. It's only later that I realized that actually they were doing it as a bit of a joke. They gave me actually really difficult things to do because no one else really wanted to do them. So attachment of earnings orders, national minimum wage solutions, you know, all sorts of things. Directors' national insurance was the first thing I think they gave me to do as a project to build in software, which I did, and it's still in use today. So yes, so kind of fallen into it a bit, Wendy, and grown, and yeah, I don't know, Sean, that's one of those sorts of things where I seem to be able to read stuff. It makes absolutely no sense to mankind, but I can make sense of it in relation to the law because the law is written like code.
Mm-hmm. And it's so challenging, isn't it, for people to interpret, and that's why they need that level of support and guidance, and why you're such an asset in the payroll community, Simon. I don't know anyone that doesn't really value what you share in your side business and how you share what you learn. So genuinely, a huge thank you on behalf of my experience in the payroll community over the years.
That's very kind of you.
No, it's true. So let's get going, because there's been lots of change this year with the launch of the Fair Work Agency. And it's one of the reasons why Jenny and I initially set up the business with Fair Work Solutions. Because we see all the time, both from Jenny's experience in supporting organizations with NMW, she's our NMW guru, and also from my experience working with multiple payroll organizations across the country, that really their real lack of understanding of the legislation and how they're trying to get and manage their compliance in a better way. And so, Simon, let's start with how many businesses do you genuinely think are actually fully compliant with NMW rules and regulations? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I'm going to be quite blunt with some of this, Wendy. I actually think most are not. They don't really have an idea. but some are protected from that because most of their workforce are quite highly paid. So it probably doesn't really come up that much as a challenge for them. But increasingly, we're seeing challenges. I mean, on the recent naming list, there's quite a major in the top 4 consultancy firms that's named and shamed. And you think, how on earth could that happen? Especially when they're NMW specialists as well. So there's an element of there's an element of it breaks into 3 groups on many subjects, mainly covered by the Fair Works agency. So there are those that understand it. There are those that don't understand it and never will, no matter how often you explain it. And there are those that don't care. And I think that means that 2/3 are under serious risk of failure of national minimum wage. And even some of those that do understand it struggle with some of the nuances of the complexities around it. And equally, there's an element of, are they the decision makers on what policies applied by employers? So how many businesses do you think are actually fully compliant with NMW rules and regulations? I'm not sure many are at all.
Wow, and see, can I actually just ask around the area of those that don't care? Do you think that's at leadership level? Do you think that is a specific area of the business? Just if you could share a wee bit more on that.
Yeah, I think it's because they're too busy. So they really have so much else going on around them that they're not interested. And when you talk to them or approach them or suggest they may have an issue, they just wouldn't believe it. So so they kind of dismiss it. So it's more of a, well, no one's complaining, or I haven't got an audit underway, or there's aspects of that. So I think there is an element of don't care that's quite prevalent on a number of the aspects, which I think is why the Fair Work Agency have been formed, is because I think there's a lot of don't care when there's a lot of the don't get it. People have a perception of what they think things should be, and the law doesn't align with that perception, so they don't believe it. So there's an element of, I can't believe that that's what it actually requires. But it does. And that's another area that's kicked in April, which people will struggle with, is the change to statutory sick pay, which again will at some point fall under the Fair Work Agency for policing and ensuring it happens. But the amount of questions on social media is just astronomical.
I mean, there's definitely lots of changes that are coming out, and we're going to start to see more and more of that, especially with the aspects of if organisations are getting NMW wrong, then the knock-on consequences over the last 6 years of how to course correct that, and then the other areas that are impacted on that. It's almost like a domino effect, isn't it?
Exactly. And we must be coming up to the point where everybody's had to keep records for 6 years. That came in a few years back. You could say, oh, well, before that we only had to keep 3, but now we've grown an extra year, etc. Everyone must be at that point of 6-year record keeping.
Can I ask you, if you had to pick one risk that you believe is currently catching lots of businesses out, what do you think that would be?
One risk. It's difficult for me to limit that to one risk. All right, deductions. I think they don't understand the concept of deductions, especially where it's for the benefit of the employer, and that includes salary sacrifice arrangements. I think that's significant, but I'd be cheeky and name another one. Compulsory training is an area where people really fall down on.
And again, areas where people are doing compulsory training, they're doing it outside the working hours, it could catch them out if they're salaried.
Exactly.
And that's where people fall down, exactly to that point. That if it's something that somebody's been on and they've done it on a Saturday night, it sits outside, and they've got salary sacrifice, it could be one that they get caught out on if they're at that threshold. So again, it's an area that it's really quite challenging for organisations to track, isn't it? If they don't have the right tools and processes in place to be able to monitor that.
Well, and these things are all casual, aren't they? So there's an element of how much control does an employer have? And it's a discussion I had some years ago with a large retail organisation where my daughters were working for them, Saturday jobs whilst at university, and going through some of their policies. Wage was minimum wage. Were they required to turn up 15 minutes before opening time? Of course they were. Did they have to stay 20 minutes after closing time whilst they cashed up? Of course they did. Were they paid for that extra time? No, they weren't. Now, was it the company policy that they did that? Absolutely it wasn't. But that was the demand of the local management. So there's an element of how do you control your management through the business and their attitudes on what they get their workforce to do. The other aspect, I guess, on that one, giving it as an example, is the edict from HQ will be, can you cut back by 10 hours of overtime? So issue 10 hours less of overtime this week than you would normally, because that times X across 2,000 stores is a lot of money that goes straight on the profit line. And that's great if you do cut back the 10 hours overtime. But what often would happen is some of the managers would get them to do the 10 hours for nothing. So they had cut back the overtime, but they still had the staff working. They just hadn't paid them. And there's an element of you run into those risks of interpretation from employer policy from the top and how that's interpreted by local management.
Simon, let's talk a little bit about the Fair Work Agency. What's your thoughts on the Fair Work Agency? Do you think that they have the appetite to live up to the one-stop shop for workers and employers?
Don't know. It's too early, Wendy, but I hope so. And there's a number of areas that they're covering, which I think have seen quite some challenge. And you can see it in the way people respond or report things or ask questions, especially on social media. So, holiday pay and sick pay is the other areas, national minimum wage. But even going into answering questions this morning on national living wage, the real living wage rather than how that interacts. It's all very interesting, but I'm very optimistic on it helping people, the citizen, in getting their rights. I think that's their aim. I think that will be a scaled thing. I don't think it's a switch on, everything's on today. I think that's something that will evolve in time, and hopefully there's an element of education for employers so that they know what they need to change and they need to start challenging themselves and think, actually what we've been doing for the past 150 years, is that still valid today? Because you may have checked it with your solicitors back in 1895. That doesn't mean it's still valid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the organizations that we work with, they really do want to do it right. They want to look after their employees. They want to make sure from a well-being point of view that they're doing things properly and compliantly. And I know payrollers, we care desperately about compliance in our world. And in the people that we're working with anyway, they're super keen on actually having just better controls and better processes to be able to see that. So if you could influence the Fair Work Agency on one issue, what would be that one that you would want to tackle?
Okay, I think the importance is in education of what is meant by some of the complexities. It'd be nice to actually think, could they have a view of actually influencing the minister to maybe simplify some aspects? The major area that really causes confusion is salary sacrifice arrangements and how they apply. So yeah, it would be that really is seeing what happens, but equally education is an area, and I think there are organisations out there pushing schemes to employers very heavily on a basis of savings. They even do it on the basis of saving the employee and cost of living without really understanding that currently under interpretation of NMW regulations, the employer might be digging themselves a hole. So it's an element of do we get to a point where we get more equitable in things? But yeah, I mean, national minimum wage is one aspect, Wendy, and it's been heavily policed by HMRC for a number of years, and that now falls under FWA. However, it's still with HMRC to police. But then we've got the incorporation of holiday. I think holiday is a big area that's misunderstood by employers.
No, I quite agree. I quite agree on that space. And you mentioned earlier around the name and shame list and some surprising names that were on there. What is your thoughts of the name and shame list? Do you think it's lost its impact, or do you think that the higher frequency of it will help with that sort of journey of education? What's your view?
Yeah, I think it's very useful. The challenge is I think sometimes it can confuse. So there's aspects of it where you think, well, what if they got caught out on? However, the claim of many that are on the shaming list is, oh, it was just an inadvertent breach, or it was relating to a particular subject. But we know that if you're on the naming list, you've received a penalty. You've actually been found, I'll say, guilty of some aspect of breach. And that can't be salary sacrifice alone, because you don't get on this naming list for salary sacrifice breach. You get on for doing something else. So they've obviously caught it. But I think there's an element of, is the confusion from it? Or do people then take the view that actually it's just too complicated? And why? But invariably, I think the shaming list might give lots of people a view of, oh, well, thank goodness I'm not on it this time. I'm okay. I don't need to do anything. What fools they were. Whereas actually, I think sometimes we need to look at ourselves and think, am I the fool? Am I the one that really needs to look and see what's going on? So I think it's effective, but we had a period where it wasn't used. So the other challenge with the latest lists is they're quite old. So they might be from, I don't know, April, but published in April, but often that's relating to 3, 4, 5 years ago, something happened. So I think there's an element of catch up and getting things up to date, so we know what the current position is and that everything's current and new, as opposed to something that people didn't understand 4 years ago.
It's quite difficult, though, even for organizations, and we've worked with a number of organizations that have had those breaches years ago, and actually reputationally trying to sort of get themselves back up to speed and get that confidence level back into various departments that have the ownership of NMW, because that's another thing, isn't it? Like, you know, in organizations, sometimes it lands with payroll, sometimes it's in HR, sometimes it's with finance, sometimes there is who actually is going to deal with the letter, because there hasn't even been that thought process around who's going to own this in a business. So it can be really challenging for those organizations, even that have been impacted many, many years ago, when there's those revisit campaigns, because HMRC, as you know, will revisit, and from what I'm understanding as well, is that revisit campaign, and then where that potentially could lead to prosecution is something that, you know, is a concern, certainly for a business owner. It's always a concern for me around, you know, making sure I'm doing things compliantly, because I don't want to have that risk for my business. What's your perspective on that? Do you see that kind of momentum starting to build out where there could be potential prosecutions?
Well, potentially so, yes. And I think there's great scope for it. But I think some employers become complacent over the time. So they may have had a compliance visit 5 or 6 years ago where they weren't named and shamed. Nothing particularly was, they didn't receive a notice, formal notice to make payments. However, I think there were probably some oddities discovered at the time. And so HMRC then go back, or the Fair Work Agency will go back with a little bit more knowledge and clarity of what happens and take another look. And I've seen that. So I've seen some employers, when you actually say, are you reviewing your policies? Are you aware of this latest? They say, we had an inspection 6 years ago, everything was fine, so we don't need to do anything. And there's an element of, then you find they're actually on the April list, because they have gone back and they have probably found things. And some of that may have been practice that was there on the prior audit visit. But now there's a slightly different interpretation or application, or something in the business has changed. I think there's an element of, if you pass a speeding trap at 70 miles an hour, you think, thank goodness for that. Now I can put my foot down. Can you put your foot down? Otherwise, there might be another speed trap further along the road. And sometimes I think we can get complacent and think actually we're okay. Whereas sometimes we need to keep on checking ourselves and just making sure that everything's good. Management changes, business attitude changes, policies change. Are they all aligned? Because the people that come up with those aren't necessarily key into the requirements of national minimum wage regulations and how that overlays and affects their part of the business. And why should it? I think that goes to your suggestion there of whose problem is this? The problem is the businesses. It's not a payroll problem. It's not an HR problem. It's not an operational problem. It's their joint problem, because operations could do things that payroll and HR aren't aware of. HR could bring in policies and schemes which payroll isn't aware of, or the implications for minimum wage. There's an element of it's a combination of things, and the payroll data could all look wonderful. That doesn't mean they haven't got people working an extra 5 hours for free somewhere that's not recorded, that's found out. So there's an element of you can only monitor what you know. So it's a joint business decision really on what they're going to do. It's a risk for a business. Can you say it's one area or not? No, I think it's all of their element of control that oversee it.
So we always ask this question, what's your £1 question? So if you could get £1 for every time you're asked this question, what would that be?
Oh, the question asked me, there's a £1 question I would ask businesses in the UK.
Let's do it that way then.
Yeah. Have you verified in the past 12 months whether your policies and procedures and application are in line with minimum wage?
That's your £1 question.
That's and I think we'll probably find that a lot of them aren't looking.
Yeah, no, sound advice for them to do. And actually, as things are progressing and as that momentum potentially, as you said, it's still early days with Fair Work Agency, but as that starts to ramp up, maybe it is something that needs to be addressed and considered more than just every 12 months in an audit process. And I think there's a lot of organizations out there that, have got these things in place and then they've just left it and they haven't reviewed it and sort of verified and checked that through.
Now, if you went for what's the £1 question that I get, I'm not sure if I get overly rich on it, but I'd have a bit of money to spend at, a theme park or something like that, is can I sacrifice all my pay as I'm coming up to retirement?
Good question. And you would be very rich on that one with the amount of people that probably ask you that.
Well, there's quite a few, yes.
Yeah.
Not very rich, but reasonable.
Simon, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your insights and your wisdom with us today. It's been really wonderful to spend some time with you. And I hope for all of you listening that there's some nuggets in there that might help you to start thinking about who owns it in your business. How often do you track that through? And if you've got any questions, please reach out to Simon or the team at Fair Work Solutions. We're here to support. Thank you, Simon, again for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Wendy.
Take care. Thank you so much for joining us on Fair Works Unplugged today. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.